iTunes, on our podcast. You can kind of catch up there. So I just want to take you today through several more scenes in David's life. Now, we're all familiar with the big scenes. There are many things. If I said David, man, you could just click through some of the main stuff in David's life. But today we're going to talk about maybe some things that aren't so, recognizable in the life of David, but they were still formative in David's life. So we're going to look at some of those maybe less known events in David's life. So we left David last time. He was running from Saul. King Saul of Israel, was very jealous over David, and he was chasing David. He had armies, and he was chasing David. David kind of had his armies, and for years and years and years, David was running, fleeing from Saul, trying to save his life. Saul, one day he got into battle. He got into a skirmish, not necessarily with David, just another army. Saul realized he was going to lose, and he was afraid as the king to fall in the hands of the enemy. So Saul took the end of his sword, put it on the ground, put the tip of the sword in his stomach, fell on his sword, and ended his life. Now, a few weeks, months later, the promise that Samuel had given David comes to pass. All the leaders, they come to David and they go, David, hey, we recognize God's hands upon you, and today we anoint you king. So they did the ceremony. They anointed all kind of the elders and leaders of Judah and Israel, and they made David king. So just a reminder, it was 14 years from the time David was anointed till he was appointed. So just want to say, stay patient. When God speaks something to your life, it may not be for tomorrow. It may be down the road. God's working his work in your life. God's working his plan in your life. So just be patient, all right? So now, I just want to point something out here just as we're watching the life of David. I don't know if this means anything to you or if you recognize maybe this quality in your life, but David has this unusual ability to do something great for God followed by something very stupid. Now, I'm sure that's just David. That's just David. He has this ability to do some awesome things and then turn around and just do something really stupid. So it's kind of a spiritual bipolar. He's on the edges here. He doesn't really live in the middle. He's doing something great or something stupid. So I want you to kind of watch that. We might mention that at the end of the service. So there's something I want to touch really quick before we get to 2 Samuel 6, and it lays a foundation for a future occurrence in David's life. So David has a problem. He's got a problem. Let's see if we can figure out what this problem is. I'm going to give you the evidence, and let's see what conclusion we can come to about David's problem. All right, so here's the evidence. Number one, when he was in Hebron, David fathers 6 kids by 6 different wives. That's evidence number one. If you look on the screen, they'll show you the passage there. 6 kids by 6 different wives. David was the original baby daddy, all right? There was no modern day rapper that could keep up with David. So that's evidence number one. Evidence number two. David forces his ex-wife Michal to come back and live with him. So Michal and David were married. When David left Saul, Michal went back to live in Saul's palace. That was her father, and they were gone. Marriage dissolved. They had moved on. David finds out as king later that Michal has remarried, and he knows where she's at. He sends a delegation from the king to go get Michal, force her to come back and live with him in the palace. And the scene is very sad because Michal's husband is weeping as they are carrying her off. His heart is broken as he's losing his wife. Third evidence here. David continues to take more wives and father more children. So if you look at this reference in 2 Samuel, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 more children. 10 more children. All right? So, wow. So what is this. What's David's problem? David's uncontrolled sexual passion. His uncontrolled sexual passions. God places sexual desires in our heart. It is a natural, God-given desire that comes with the way that we are made. But the purpose of that sexual desire is to find someone that you love, and in the context of a committed relationship or marriage, in the sacredness of marriage, that's when the sexual desire, comes to pass. And out of that love and commitment of those two people, children are born into a loving and committed family. That's the way God planned it, not the way David lived it out. Take away out of God's plan, take away love and the sacredness and the commitment or the context of family for children, and it just becomes a physical act, with loveless participants, with children born into a loveless, commitmentless marriage. That is not God's way. That's why He puts boundaries on sexual activity even when we are married or when we are single. God says, this is what I've created. This is the plan and the way that I want it to be lived out. So David was a terrible example here. A terrible example. He could not control himself in this area. Anytime he saw a woman, he took her, married, concubine, whatever. It did not marry. And this is the same way that secular society says that we should behave when it comes to sexuality. There are no boundaries on sex. Have as many partners as you would like. Have as many babies as you would like. Have as many relationships as you would like. Just go from, attraction, sex, break up, attraction, sex, break up. That's the pattern, that's the pattern that society says. But I want to say to you, God has a better plan. God has a better plan when it comes to, how we live out our sex life. We are not made, 1 Corinthians says, the body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord. It didn't say the body wasn't meant for sex. It said it's not meant and it's designed for sexual immorality. It is not best for you to go through the cycle of attraction, sex, breakup. Attraction, sex, breakup. And they say, that most sexual activity and new relationships begin after the third or fourth date. Hey, we've been to Longhorn. We're ready to take this to the next step. That's what people think. I've spent more than $40 on a date. It is time. But God has a better plan for you. We're not created that way. We're not created. It's not best for you to go bed to bed to bed, person to person to person. And in between that, we're popping out baby, baby, baby. That's not God's plan for your life. Students, God has a better plan for you. Do it God's way. You wait on God's person. You wait on God's time. You save your body for the right moment. That's God's plan. So, my advice to you is button it up, pull it up, zip it up, and wait on God. All right. That's not even part of my message. That was just the free part. That was the appetizer. Okay? All right. So I just want you to think, I just want you to remember this behavior in his life, because we're going to come back later to something that we all well know that occurs in his life, but that did not happen in one incident. There was already a pattern of terrible behavior in this area. So, all right, 2 Samuel chapter 6. Let's look at David's impulsive nature and collision of values. 2 Samuel 6, I'll bring you to that in just a second. So David was king. He had been king for a period of while. God had given him favor and success. The kingdom had gone from 6,000 square miles to 60,000 square miles. David had set up extensive trade routes throughout the world. Wealth and prosperity was coming to Israel. They were at peace with other nations. Not only economically and militarily were they doing well, but David was trying to do what he could, the best he could, to reestablish Jerusalem as a center of worship and have everyone, have their focus on God. So let me just say, David is looking, he's got success on every hand, economically, militarily, but yet in his heart, there was something that was just not complete, and that was having the presence of God in Jerusalem and in his life. And I want to say to you this morning, I don't care how much money you make, I don't care what your job title is or what is in your 401k, there will never, ever be happiness in the center of your heart until the presence of Jesus is there. David was like, man, there's something that's not here, something that's not right. The presence of God, the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God, it's not here in Jerusalem. Oh my goodness, let's go get it. Let's go get it. Now, I got an image of the Ark of the Covenant. I'm going to put up there. I want to give you just a little, background on that. We have the image. There we go. So the Ark of the Covenant came from the design of God in the time of Moses. It was made out of wood, but it was plated with gold inside and out. On the inside of the Ark of the Covenant, they carried the 10 Commandments. They carried a pot of manna from Moses' time. They carried the rod of Aaron that budded and had fruit on there. It had a great, not only historical significance, but it had great spiritual significance as well. It was not just a mobile museum of the great acts of God. This is where God said, my presence will dwell on this particular ark. So even in the great design that you can read in Exodus, God also gave a plan that this thing should be transported, because not only did it have some really cool items in it, it was holy. It was the presence of God. And he said, you handle this thing very carefully. So when you transport it, there's some rings that I'm going to put on the side. And you should put poles on the side. And the Levites, the priests, they should consecrate themselves and cleanse themselves. And only the Levites should be able to lift the ark and carry it. Now, it's very difficult for us, and the way we live, we don't really have holy items. So it's hard to describe what a holy item is. We have valuables, things that are worth money, or we have things that are of sentimental value. We don't really have holy items. Like in our household, Becky collects like china, like Lenox Eternal. That's our holy items there. Lenox Holiday, Waterford Crystal. And there are certain times that she will allow us to eat upon those plates. And even when you are eating on it, you just feel unworthy. You just, and she's smiling and happy because she's using her china. But at the same time, she's watching you as well. She's keeping an eye on you. So, we all have items like that, but we don't really have anything that's like holy, that's reverent. And that's what this thing was. It was an indicator of the presence of God. It was a holy item. So here comes David. David is a type A person. He's a problem solver. He's a quick thinker. He is impulsive. He's thinking, all right, here's the problem. We need the presence of God. It's about 50 miles away from here, so here's what we're going to do. I want you to get some men. I want you to go down where it's at. I want you to take a cart. I want you to place it in the cart, and I want you to bring it back, and I want you to bring it back up here. Now, so a couple of problems with that. That's how we approach things in life. Impulsively. Don't think things through. And that was just, he's a problem solver. This is what he does. I make decisions. I make things happen. He also had a collision of values because he needed the presence of God. He wanted the presence of God, which is great, but yet he took shortcuts when it came to how to make that big vision take place. His values were inconsistent. I want to say we see that happening today. We think we know what God's will is for our life, and we just begin to move. We don't ask anybody. We don't pray about it. We don't think about it. Sometimes we think, well, I'm pretty spiritual. I know how to discern the will of the Lord. Then we get ourselves messed up. Our previous success makes us have a little spiritual pride when it comes to making decisions. That's what Esau did. He acted impulsively. He made a decision that did not serve him in his best interest. So here's what the scripture says. 2 Samuel 6, 1 through 7. David brought together all the able young men of Israel, 30,000. He and all of his men went to Bela in Judah to bring there from the ark of God, which is called by that name, the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim and the ark. And they set the ark on a new cart. And David and all of Israel were celebrating with all of their might. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of this irreverent act. Therefore, God struck him down and he died beside the ark. And I'm going to read one other verse in verse 8. Then David became angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah. So here's this holy thing. It's already written. It's already well known. Only Levites transport this thing. It's only done with poles. This is how it's done. But David's impulsive act, not thinking it through, conflicting values. Now he's got a problem. Somebody has irreverently touched the Ark of the Covenant and has lost their life. And then David was angry. David, Lord, what are you doing? What are you doing? He went his own path, made his own decisions, walked his own way. It didn't work out. It was away from God or against God's plan. And then David's upset with the Lord. And that's what happens. Listen, if we've got things, we need to take time. We need to pray them through, especially if you're a type A, if you're an impulsive person. You need to slow it down. Get some counsel. Pray over the Lord. Pray over God's will. Ask God what He would have for you to do. Is that you? I mean, is that you? Is that how you handle things? Have you messed some things up in your life because of impulsive decision making? Have you gone against God's will and plan? So David's upset. All right, but then 1 Chronicles 15, David reapproaches it again. He reapproaches it again. 1 Chronicles 15. So the priests and the Levites consecrated themselves in order to bring up the ark. Exactly what Moses said to do. And then the Levites carried the ark of God. Look at what he says. With the poles on their shoulders. Look what he says. As Moses commanded in accordance with God's word. So now he goes back. Now he does it right. He does it the way that God says. I want to say to you, go ahead with your own plans. Go ahead with your own impulse. But it's going to be a lot of headache and heartache. If you do it God's way, in God's time, you're going to see the favor of God and the blessing of God. And your life will be a lot simpler. Your life will be a lot simpler. All right, let's look at another scene in David's life. Go to the next chapter. 2 Samuel 7. Let's talk about when God says no. After the king was settled in his palace, the Lord had given him rest from all of his enemies around him. And he said to Nathan the prophet, "Here I am living in a house of cedar while the ark of God remains in a tent." So David's looking around. He's got a fine place to live. And he's thinking, man, look at that ark. It's under this shabby old tent, I think I want to do something about that. So he asked Nathan the prophet, and Nathan says, go do whatever's in your heart. And let me just say something here. Sometimes your friends and counselors are wrong, all right? Sometimes you need to make sure that you always talk to the Lord about things. So Nathan says, sure, whatever's in your heart, go do it. But that night, the Lord came to Nathan. And here is what he said, like he's speaking to David. "Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I've not dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites out of Egypt to this day. I've been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling, wherever I've moved with all the Israelites. Did I ever say to any of their rulers whom I've commanded to shepherd over the people, 'Why have you not built me a house?' Then go tell my servant David, this is what the Almighty says. I took you from the pasture, from tending the flock, appointed you ruler over my people of Israel. You have been wherever you have gone. I have been wherever you have gone. I have cut off all of your enemies from before you. Now I will make your name great on the earth. like the names of the greatest men. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up an offspring to succeed you. I will establish his kingdom. I will raise up an offspring to succeed you, your offspring. He is the one who will build a house for my name. Nathan reported all those words to David. So David had this thing in his heart. Wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but God said no. Let's talk about when God says no. Every good idea is not a God idea. Every good idea that we have is not a God idea. And if we're doing what we need to do and putting things before the Lord, there are times that you'll get the green light, which we love, and then there's times that we get the red light, when he says no. And we are not people that like the word no. It started when we were 2, and it stayed with us our whole life. When God says no, here's what I've learned. He doesn't always give me the reason why. And I don't like that. Becky and I were in church on a Sunday morning at First Assembly of God, Honolulu, Hawaii. The pastor gets up that morning and he says, if you haven't heard, last week I have surrendered my resignation and the church is now looking for a new pastor. And I'm just like, oh God, your timing is amazing. Lord, I know I'm living in Birmingham, but I will leave all of that behind to follow you. And the Lord answered that prayer and sent us to Kentucky for 19 years. Doesn't always, sometimes he just says no. It's not the right thing. When God says no, move on. Don't try to work around. Get a compromise. You know how kids are with their parents? They got the no parent, then they got the maybe parent. And they're always coming, trying to do a workaround. If God says no to you, don't come to me and try to get me to say yes and get me and you in trouble. You just accept that no. And to David's credit, he didn't like it. He just kind of sat down when he heard it. He didn't like it because this is something that he wanted to do. But to David's credit, he didn't proceed. Now, sometimes no, let's talk about no. When God says no, stop. When God says no, sometimes no means not now. The timing is not right. You are not ready, and I am positioning things in your life for something that will happen later on. So, no, not now. Don't blow it by moving ahead now because you may set the whole plan back and he has to start over. So sometimes when God says no, it is a not now. Sometimes when God says no, there is danger ahead. You don't know what's around the corner. You don't know the plan that the enemy has laid in your path. You don't know the trap that the enemy has laid before you. There were times where Paul wanted to go certain areas in the book of Acts, and the Lord said, no, don't go there. You don't know, the motives and plans of other people. So sometimes the no means there's danger ahead. Stay away. Don't do a workaround. Don't try to compromise and make it happen. You don't know what's around the corner. Sometimes no means not now. Sometimes no means there's danger ahead. Sometimes no means I have a better plan for you. God has a great plan for you. Don't settle for second best. Don't force this and settle for second best. There's a passage that talks about the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. I don't want the good will of God when I can have the perfect will of God. I don't want the acceptable will of God when I can have the perfect will of God. So sometimes no means I got a better plan for you. I got something that's better for you. So just no. Just stop. Just stop what you're doing. And then no means I might have someone else in mind. I mean, did David want to do everything? I mean, you want to Goliath, king, miracles, and build the temple? I mean, God may have something else in store for somebody else. You may not have the giftings to do what's in your heart. What if David built a shabby temple that leaked when it rained? That wouldn't be a glorious end to the story. So sometimes God's will has more in his mind than just you. Don't be hurt with that, all right? He's got other people in mind. So there are times that God is saying to some of you, no. Some of you have toxic friendships in your life, toxic relationships in your life, and God has already said, no, leave it alone. Business opportunities, no. Plans in the future, there are things that God has said, no. Surrender your plans to God. Do what David did. Do what David did. Hey, I had this plan. I wanted to do it. God said no, and I'm going to drop it. I'm going to drop it. Just surrender your own thoughts and ideas. Give it to the Lord. Jesus prayed this prayer, not my will, but yours. Not mine. Not mine. Not my will, but yours. The very last scene of David's life. I love this scene and story. 2 Samuel 9, just working through some of the lesser-known stories. Let's talk about David and Mephibosheth. What a great, great story. So David asked the question, 2 Samuel 9:1, is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness to Jonathan's sake? That is such an unusual request because in the era of divine right kings, when you became the king, you killed all the descendants of the previous king because you never wanted to have a problem, one of them thinking they were an heir to the throne. So that is such an unusual statement, on many levels. Is there anyone left of the house of Jonathan or of the house of Saul who I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Well, somebody came to David and said, actually, there is. Let me tell you the story. Jonathan has a son, and his name is Mephibosheth. And when Mephibosheth was 5, when the household of Saul was collapsing and they were killing all of Saul's descendants, Mephibosheth was 5 years old, and the servant picked up Mephibosheth and started to run with him and take him to safety. But the servant fell on his legs, broke his legs, and he can't walk. He can't walk. And he's alive, and he's living 30 or 40 miles from here. And David says, where? Where's he living? And he says, Lodabar. He's living with Lodabar. Lodabar was the desert. It had no pasture. It was a place of the poor. It was a place, it was just, there was no, why would you go live there? It's kind of like Apalachicola. When you hear that, it's kind of, what's there? What's there? David says, all right, wow. All right, so go get him and bring him to me. So David sends a delegation, and he knocks on the door, and this young adult man just kind of drags himself to the front door, and it opens it up, and the servant says, hey, I'm from the household of David. The king wants you to come to his palace. That is bad news if you're the descendant of the previous king. It's kind of like the movie Godfather when they put you in the back seat and take you somewhere. But what's he going to do? So Mephibosheth goes with this delegation. They go stand before the king. And I love it because the first thing David says to him is, don't be afraid. I'm sure he had that. He said, don't be afraid. I'm sure he had that look. And David said, I want to tell you something. Because of your father, I'm going to show kindness to you. And all the personal land that was taken away from the household of Saul, I'm going to give back to you. And not only that, you are always welcome to eat at the king's table. The rest of your life, you have an invitation to come eat at the king's table. Wow. What a scene. So imagine this scene. You got the royal banquet hall. And it's set up for a royal banquet. You've got all the fine china, the holy china. It's out. The smell of the food is being prepared. All of the servants are making sure the table is set for the royal banquet. And in comes David's family. All of his wives and children. This took a while, okay? It just took a while. And they all kind of come in. I mean, there's Absalom, big, strong Absalom with his thick hair that we'll talk about later. There's Adonijah, the son, Tamar, the daughter. All the children come around the royal banquet table, and they are seated in their finely pressed robes and gowns. They are seated. And then once they are seated, the king enters. Everyone stands as King David comes to the head of the table. Everyone stands at this royal banquet in this royal moment. And David comes to the head table and he sits down and he goes, "Whoa, wait a minute. We're missing someone. Where's Mephibosheth? Go get Mephibosheth." And they bring, the door opens, all the family in their pressed garments, they look. And here comes on a rudimentary crutch, kind of dragging himself, Mephibosheth in his old dirty clothes and his nasty feet, smelling like sweat. He's from Lodabar, which people look down on that. He's from Saul's family, and he takes his place at the banquet table. And David says, "Now we can begin. All the family is here." Is that not a great picture of the grace of God? Of the grace of God. If you took a picture, a family picture, somebody would stand out. They wouldn't be like they were there. But I'm telling you, grace says to me, welcome to the banquet. Grace says, grace doesn't check your past to see if you're good enough. Grace doesn't check your past to see if you're good enough. You can't do something bad enough to disqualify you from God's grace. So grace says, welcome to the banquet. Grace doesn't look at your good points to see if you're worthy enough to qualify. So grace doesn't look over and see, wow, they've done these particular things, so they're good enough, because it doesn't matter what all the good things that you've done, you haven't done enough to qualify. Grace says, welcome to the banquet. Grace does not come in minimal qualities, but is lavished upon you. This is not a one-time ticket to the banquet table. This is a lifetime invitation. Grace says to you, welcome to the banquet. Grace is not looking for what you can pay or what you can do. You can only receive grace if you come empty-handed. Grace says, say it with me, welcome to the banquet. Grace is not a single act of forgiveness, but it is an invitation to join the King's family permanently. Sometimes when I travel, if you're in an airport and you got a long layover, you'll buy a single pass to go into the lounge with all the food, and I always feel a little awkward because I'm not really a member. I just bought a day pass. I don't really feel comfortable with all those rich folks, but I want to tell you, grace is not for one single act. Grace is welcome to the family. Welcome to the banquet. It's not just one-time thing. It is eternal. Grace is simply God honoring the work of Jesus, extending his grace to us. As David honored Jonathan and gave grace to his descendants, God honors the work of Jesus and extended grace to everyone. So today, he says to everyone, welcome to the banquet. Matt, come this morning. What a great scene. What a great understanding of grace. Romans 11 says, if by grace, then it cannot be based on works. If it were, grace would not be grace. So there he is, a poor, dirty guy, but he's part of David's family. So today, I just want to Just want to challenge you in some areas this morning that we saw through God's Word. Is your spiritual life very streaky? You do some great things, do some stupid things. You feel like you're growing, you fall. Maybe you just need a little spiritual consistency in your life. Maybe you've got some decisions that you've blown, some impulsive thoughts, ideas that you moved and acted, and man, you're just kind of paying the price for it. You just need to go, Lord, I need to start over. There's some things I need to surrender in my life, just some decisions that I just went ahead and did, and I'm paying the consequence for that. Lord, I need to back up and do that your way. Maybe you've said yes when God said no. Maybe there was something in your life and you knew and you went ahead. And here's a moment where you want to come and go, hey, I was wrong. I was wrong. I just want to come to repentance. I want to come and go, I'm sorry, Lord, and I want to make this right. I want to make this right. Or maybe you're here this morning. Maybe you're here this morning and you're like Mephibosheth when it comes to your walk with God. You don't feel worthy. You don't feel maybe things that you've done, maybe your past, past behaviors. But I want to tell you this morning that the word is just welcome to the banquet. Doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what you've done, doesn't matter how good you've tried to be. There's an open invitation to the King's banquet. Come and stay. Come and eat. It's permanent. It's permanent. Would you stand this morning, man? Would you just lead us in a chorus today?